Bitcoin enthusiasts like to talk about digital scarcity, but when the infrastructure that runs digital anything stops working, scarcity gets very physical very fast. Here are 11 products that'll be worth more than Bitcoin when the collapse happens. Product 11: antibiotics and medical supplies. Prescription antibiotics are perhaps the single most asymmetrically valuable commodity in any collapse scenario. They require sophisticated pharmaceutical manufacturing to produce, have no household substitute, and address conditions, infected wounds, respiratory infections, urinary tract infections, that are reliably fatal without treatment and were regularly fatal before the antibiotic era. The global mortality rate from bacterial infections in the pre-antibiotic period was not a minor historical footnote. It was the leading cause of death for most of human history. In a collapse scenario where medical supply chains are disrupted and hospitals are operating at reduced capacity or not at all, a course of broad-spectrum antibiotics becomes extraordinarily valuable. People will trade significant amounts of other goods for access to something that can prevent a family member from dying of an infected wound. That's not speculation. It's what happened in post-Soviet Russia in the early 1990s when pharmaceutical supply chains collapsed along with the state infrastructure, and again in post-invasion Iraq when basic medical supplies became primary black market commodities within weeks. Fish antibiotics, amoxicillin, and similar formulations sold for aquatic use are chemically identical to human-grade formulations, but available without prescription in the United States. This is a well-documented workaround that preppers have used for years for storage purposes. The shelf life of properly stored antibiotics typically runs 2 to 4 years from manufacture, though studies from the U.S. military's Drug Shelf Life Extension program have found that many formulations remain potent well beyond their labeled expiration dates when stored in appropriate conditions. Beyond antibiotics, a comprehensive medical supply kit, tourniquets, suture material, wound irrigation supplies, blood pressure cuffs, stethoscopes, glucose meters with test strips, epinephrine auto-injectors for anaphylaxis, wound closure strips, hemostatic gauze, represents a category of barter value that can only be accessed by anyone with enough foresight to have acquired it beforehand. The knowledge to use these items competently is, arguably, worth more than the items themselves, which is a point worth considering when deciding whether to take a wilderness first aid course. Before we continue, I prepared a step-by-step ebook that's currently on sale, packed with practical survival systems and simple life hacks. It's designed to help you save money, stay prepared, and improve everyday safety in a simple, realistic way. You can access it instantly while the discounted price is still available. You can find the link in the description. Now let's get back to the video. Product 10: alcohol, drinkable, and isopropyl. Alcohol has functioned as a trade currency in virtually every collapse scenario in modern history. It has two completely separate value propositions: consumption and disinfection, which makes it unusually versatile as a barter commodity. On the consumption side, distilled spirits, vodka, whiskey, rum, store essentially indefinitely when sealed. Unlike wine or beer, spirits with high alcohol content do not degrade meaningfully over time. A bottle of sealed vodka purchased today will be exactly as useful in 20 years. The emotional and psychological value of alcohol in a prolonged crisis is not trivial. People will trade significant goods for it, which is why it circulated as informal currency in the Soviet Union during the 1990s collapse, and in post-World War II Europe, where it was sometimes more reliable than official currency. Mikhail Gorbachev's anti-alcohol campaign of 1985 created a black market that, by the time the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, had taught an entire population how to value and trade alcohol outside official channels. When the official economy failed, those informal networks and valuations were already in place. In some regions of Russia during the early 1990s, vodka was more readily accepted for payment than rubles, and workers received portions of their wages in alcohol when employers ran out of cash. It is not a flattering picture of human behavior under pressure, but it is an accurate one. On the medical side, isopropyl alcohol at 70% concentration is the standard disinfectant used in medical settings. It kills bacteria and viruses on surfaces and wounds, and in a scenario where medical supplies are scarce, it becomes essential for basic wound care that would otherwise lead to infection. It has a shelf life of approximately 2 to 3 years in sealed containers and takes up minimal storage space relative to its utility. Alcohol's dual function also makes it a flexible barter item in a way that single-purpose goods aren't. A bottle of vodka can be traded for its consumption value to one person and its medical utility to another, which means the seller doesn't need to predict exactly what the buyer wants it for. That flexibility is itself a form of liquidity, in the literal and economic sense. It converts easily into whatever the immediate need happens to be. Product 9. Salt. Salt is on this list for the same reason it was used as currency by the Roman army, from which the word salary is derived. From the Latin salarium, the allowance given to soldiers for the purchase of salt, and the same reason wars have been fought over salt deposits for most of human history. It is essential, irreplaceable, and in a world without modern food preservation infrastructure, it is the difference between having food in winter and not. Modern food preservation has made most people forget that salt is not primarily a flavor enhancer. It is the original preservation technology. Salting, curing, and brining meat and fish are the methods that allowed pre-refrigeration populations to store protein through winter, across oceanic voyages, and through periods of scarcity. Salt draws moisture out of food, creating an inhospitable environment for bacterial growth. Without refrigeration, which a grid failure eliminates, salt curing becomes the primary means of preserving protein beyond a few days. The history of salt's economic importance is lengthy and consistent. The Roman salt road, the Via Salaria, connected Rome to the Adriatic salt works and was one of the most important trade routes in the ancient Mediterranean. Medieval European salt taxes were significant revenue sources for governments. The British salt tax in colonial India was sufficient political flashpoint to motivate Gandhi's Salt March of 1930, arguably one of the most historically significant acts of civil disobedience in the 20th century, over salt. The commodity that modern people pick up in a 26-ounce canister for under $1 was, for most of human history, something worth marching for. Salt is cheap, essentially infinite in shelf life when kept dry, and takes up relatively little storage space per pound. A 50-pound bag of non-iodized salt costs a few dollars today and represents an enormous amount of potential barter value in a scenario where fresh food preservation is a daily survival concern. Salt also has a quiet second use that gets overlooked. It's a critical input for livestock health, water softening, and a range of basic chemistry applications from soap making to leather tanning. A household that has salt has more than a seasoning. It has a multi-purpose preservation, agricultural, and craft material that other households will need across several different categories of daily life, which broadens its trading appeal considerably beyond food storage alone. Product 8. Heirloom seeds. Heirloom seeds are non-hybrid, open-pollinated plant varieties that produce seeds which can be saved and replanted successfully in the following season. Hybrid seeds, which represent the majority of commercial agriculture, typically do not breed true, meaning the seeds saved from hybrid plants produce inferior or unpredictable offspring. Industrial agriculture built its entire model around this property because it ensures farmers buy new seed every year. In a collapse scenario, this is a catastrophic vulnerability for anyone who stored hybrid seeds, thinking they had a long-term food production capability. A collection of heirloom vegetable seeds representing the full growing season: tomatoes, beans, squash, corn, root vegetables, leafy greens, herbs, is a self-replicating food production system. Plant it once, save the seeds from the strongest plants each harvest, replant next year. In an extended collapse scenario where commercial food supply chains are disrupted, the ability to produce food year over year without external input is not just valuable, it is the foundation of any long-term community survival. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, which holds backup copies of over 1.3 million seed varieties from around the world, exists specifically because governments and agricultural scientists recognize that preserving seed diversity is existential level important. In February 2017, the vault received its first withdrawal from Syria, where the ongoing conflict had destroyed the country's national seed bank in Aleppo. That withdrawal is a real-world demonstration of exactly why seed preservation matters. The same principle applies at the household scale for the same reason. Properly stored heirloom seeds, sealed in airtight containers with oxygen absorbers, kept cool and dry, can remain viable for 5 to 10 years for most vegetable varieties, and significantly longer for some. A $30 heirloom seed collection from a reputable supplier, stored correctly, represents decades of food production capability that regenerates itself annually. The person in a collapsed community who understands how to select, save, dry, and store seeds properly is providing a service that extends the community's food security indefinitely, and that knowledge, like the seeds themselves, can be traded. One practical note: heirloom seeds are only as valuable as the knowledge to grow them effectively. The seeds and the skill to use them are the complete package. A person who has never grown food and has a seed collection is less useful to a barter community than a person who understands soil preparation, germination requirements, companion planting, and pest management. The seeds and the gardening knowledge together are what's worth having. Product 7. Fuel: diesel, propane, gasoline. Fuel is the most immediately tangible collapse commodity because its value is visible within hours of a crisis beginning. Gas stations run on electric pumps, and when the grid goes down, fuel pumping stops regardless of how much fuel is actually in the underground storage tanks. The vehicles, generators, and equipment that communities depend on become inoperable immediately. Whoever has stored fuel has mobility, power generation, cooking capability, and heating. And everyone who doesn't will need access to those things. Diesel is the preferred long-term fuel storage option because it is less volatile than gasoline and stores more reliably with appropriate fuel stabilizers like PRI-D. Properly treated, diesel can remain usable for 2 to 3 years in sealed containers, and some diesel storage programs extend that to 5 years with chemical treatment and proper container selection. Diesel also powers the widest range of heavy equipment: generators, farm tractors, and most commercial transport. Propane in sealed tanks stores indefinitely, it does not degrade over time, and powers a wide range of cooking and heating equipment. A 500-gallon propane tank is a significant infrastructure investment, but provides fuel security across multiple years of household cooking and supplemental heating without any degradation concern. Gasoline, while less stable than diesel and requiring stabilizer treatment within the first few months, remains the most universally usable liquid fuel given the overwhelming majority of consumer engines designed around it. A person with a few hundred gallons of treated, stored gasoline in a serious regional crisis is in a position to provide transportation services that no one else can. A barter position of considerable leverage. Fuel's barter value also compounds with everything else on this list. Stored fuel powers the equipment that processes other barter goods, running a generator to keep antibiotics refrigerated, powering a water pump for irrigation, running tools to process firewood at scale. A person with fuel isn't just trading fuel directly. They're enabling every other valuable activity in the immediate community, which puts them in a position to negotiate access to almost anything in exchange. The storage logistics require attention to safety, ventilation, and local legal limits on residential fuel storage. But within those constraints, even a modest fuel reserve represents significant barter value in a crisis where commercial fuel access is simply unavailable at any price. Product 6. Water filtration equipment. Water filtration becomes a survival-critical barter item within 48 to 72 hours of municipal water system failure. Municipal water treatment depends on powered pumping and chemical dosing systems that fail when the grid goes down. Backup generator fuel in most treatment facilities lasts days, not weeks. In a serious collapse scenario, surface water from rivers, streams, ponds, and rainwater collection becomes the primary source for most people. And surface water carries bacteria, viruses, protozoa, and chemical contaminants that make it unsafe to drink without treatment. A quality hollow fiber filter. The Sawyer Squeeze filters approximately 100,000 gallons over its lifespan according to manufacturer specifications. Or a gravity-fed ceramic filter capable of processing large quantities for a household represents technology that most people do not own and will desperately need. In a barter economy, the person with a working filtration system capable of producing safe water for others has a renewable service to offer. The filter produces value every day. The distinction between filter types matters for barter purposes. Standard hollow fiber filters remove bacteria and protozoa, but do not remove viruses. which is adequate for most backcountry water sources, but potentially inadequate for water near populated areas in a collapse scenario where sewage systems have also failed. Filters with viral removal capability or the use of chemical treatment alongside mechanical filtration addresses the complete threat spectrum. The stored filter and treatment supply is one of the few barter items on this list that is both immediately deployable and renewable in its value generation. A filter that produces 100,000 gallons of safe water is not a one-time trade. It's an ongoing capability that people will trade for access to repeatedly. Product 5. Hand tools. Quality manual equipment. Power tools become decorative when the power stops. Hand tools, quality ones, not the lightweight consumer versions, become the means by which anything practical gets built, repaired, or maintained. A sharp handsaw, a good set of chisels, a quality plane, a brace and bit set, hammers, axes, draw knives, hatchets, and basic metalworking tools represent a complete capability for wood construction and basic fabrication without electricity. The important qualifier is quality. A $15 saw from a big box store is not the same object as a vintage Diston handsaw. A cast aluminum consumer hammer is not the same as a forged steel framing hammer. Quality hand tools made from high-carbon steel, properly maintained and sharpened, last generations. There is a reason that quality pre-war hand tools, American and British made from the late 19th and early 20th century, are actively collected and sought after by serious woodworkers today. They outperform most current retail equivalents in edge retention and overall durability. A complete set of quality hand tools, maintained and sharp, represents not just immediate utility, but a productive capability that can be leveraged for barter indefinitely. The person who can repair a structure, build furniture, fabricate basic equipment, or sharpen other people's tools is providing services that everyone around them needs. Sharpening services alone, keeping axes, knives, and cutting tools functional, would be a viable barter occupation in a community without access to powered grinding equipment. Axes and hatchets deserve particular mention. Felling, splitting, and processing firewood without a chainsaw is labor-intensive, but entirely feasible with good sharp axes and appropriate technique. A community's ability to maintain wood fuel supply through winter depends on this capability and the tools that enable it. Quality axes, splitting mauls, hatchets, and sharpening equipment have barter value proportional to that dependency. Product 4. Coffee and tobacco. These two commodities appear on the collapse barter list for the same reason alcohol does. They are deeply habitual, create physiological and psychological dependency in regular users, and are impossible to produce at the household level without specific knowledge, equipment, and growing conditions. Neither one is necessary for survival. Both have functioned as de facto currency in virtually every collapse scenario in modern history because people will trade necessities for them. Coffee was used as a form of informal currency among Union and Confederate soldiers during the American Civil War. It was, by many accounts, the most psychologically valued non-combat supply in the Union Army. Confederate soldiers famously traded tobacco for Union soldiers' coffee across picket lines during quiet periods of the war. The exchange happened regularly enough to be documented in numerous soldier accounts and letters home. The exchange rate was essentially whatever the two parties agreed on, which is exactly what barter currency looks like before it formalizes. Tobacco's history as collapse currency is extensive. In post-World War II Europe, American cigarettes circulated as the most stable de facto currency in occupied Germany, trading at rates that were consistently predictable across different zones and transactions. Cigarettes served the same function in Soviet-era prison economies and in the POW camp that R.A. Radford documented in his 1945 economics paper, The Economic Organization of a POW Camp, a paper that remains a standard academic reference for understanding how currencies emerge organically from barter systems. Radford's account was based on his direct experience as a prisoner of war. Green coffee beans, unroasted, store for 1 to 2 years under ambient conditions and considerably longer when vacuum sealed with oxygen absorbers. Roasted coffee degrades within weeks to months. A supply of green beans with a small cast iron skillet or simple drum roaster and a manual hand grinder is a complete coffee production operation that requires no infrastructure beyond fire. Tobacco is somewhat more complicated to store long-term than coffee. Loose tobacco kept in airtight containers with consistent humidity control can last several years, but it requires more careful attention than sealed coffee or salt. Despite that added complexity, demand for tobacco among habitual users tends to be so consistent and so insistent that it remains one of the most reliable barter goods regardless of storage difficulty. The people who want it badly, and that urgency translates directly into trading leverage for whoever has a supply. Product 3. Firearms and ammunition. This entry comes with the obvious caveat that firearm ownership and storage is governed by law and varies significantly by jurisdiction. Within whatever legal framework applies, a reliable firearm and a substantial ammunition supply represent collapse barter value for reasons that are practical, historical, and demographic. On the practical side, the ability to hunt is directly tied to having an appropriate firearm and the skill to use it. A .22 LR rifle is the most efficient hunting platform in terms of ammunition cost, weight, and storage density. It's effective for small game and birds, produces minimal noise compared to larger calibers, and its ammunition weighs roughly 40 rounds per ounce. A person storing 5,000 rounds of .22 LR occupies about 8 pounds of storage weight compared to roughly 150 rounds of .308 for the same weight. That efficiency matters when considering long-term hunting capability. Ammunition itself, rather than firearms, is arguably the higher value barter item in a collapse scenario. Firearms are relatively durable and already widely distributed. A 2020 survey by the Pew Research Center found that approximately 44% of American adults live in a household with a gun. Ammunition, consumed and not reusable without specialized reloading equipment and components, becomes scarce quickly when manufacturing and distribution chains break down. Standard calibers, 9mm handgun, .22 LR rimfire, 12-gauge shotgun, have the broadest user base and therefore the highest barter demand, since they're useful to the largest number of potential trading partners. Reloading equipment and components deserve a brief mention as a related and somewhat overlooked barter category. A person with a reloading press, dyes, and a supply of primers, powder, and bullets can produce ammunition indefinitely from raw materials, rather than relying on a finite stored supply. That capability, while requiring more upfront investment and specific knowledge than simply storing finished ammunition, represents a renewable production capacity rather than a depletable one. The same distinction that makes water filtration more valuable than stored water alone. Product 2. Antibacterial soap, hygiene supplies, and feminine products. Hygiene supplies are routinely underestimated in collapse preparedness lists because they don't feel dramatic. They are, however, among the most consistently valued barter items in documented post-disaster scenarios for the straightforward reason that personal hygiene has direct health consequences, and its absence degrades skin integrity, increases disease transmission, and reduces the overall functionality of the people it affects. Antibacterial soap, toothpaste, dental floss, toilet paper, disposable razors, deodorant. These are items that people are accustomed to having in unlimited supply and genuinely do not function well without. Dental hygiene specifically becomes a survival issue in extended collapse scenarios, because untreated tooth infections can become systemic infections that are life-threatening without antibiotics. Dental pain also impairs concentration and functional capacity in ways that are entirely avoidable with basic dental hygiene supplies. A tube of toothpaste and a package of dental floss take up essentially no storage space and will trade for meaningful goods. Toilet paper, specifically, has demonstrated its barter value in real time during the COVID-19 pandemic panic buying of early 2020, when it disappeared from store shelves within days of crisis announcements, despite being not remotely essential to survival. Its barter value in a genuine multi-week collapse would be higher still. People will trade food for comfort items when they have enough food, which is a predictable human behavior worth planning around. Feminine hygiene products represent a category that is frequently overlooked in preparedness and barter discussions and should not be. Roughly half the population has a monthly need for these supplies that continues regardless of grid status, supply chain integrity, or social chaos. Reusable alternatives exist, menstrual cups, cloth pads, but require water, soap, and time to manage, all of which may be constrained resources. A supply of disposable feminine hygiene products has specific, consistent, and non-negotiable demand from a large population that frequently goes unserved in disaster scenarios. Humanitarian organizations have documented this gap repeatedly across multiple different post-disaster environments. As former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate has said about disaster preparedness generally, we tend to plan for the disasters we've seen, not the ones that are coming. The hygiene supply gap in most preparedness plans is a version of exactly that failure, assuming that what gets covered in basic preparedness guides covers everything that actually matters to the people affected. Product 1. Clean water and water storage capacity. Water earns the top position not because it's the most interesting item on this list, it isn't, but because the human body's 3 to 4 day survival window without it makes it the most urgent barter commodity in any collapse scenario. The person controlling reliable access to clean water in a community without functioning municipal water is in a barter position that no amount of Bitcoin, gold, or any other stored value can match, because water is needed immediately and continuously by everyone, every day, without exception. The barter value of water is not just about having stored water. Stored water is finite and eventually runs out. The higher value position is having the capacity to produce clean water on an ongoing basis. Filtration equipment, chemical treatment supplies, knowledge of local water sources, and the physical infrastructure to collect and treat rainwater or surface water consistently. A gravity-fed filtration system capable of producing 10 gallons of safe water per hour, positioned near a reliable surface water source, is a community-level resource in a collapse scenario. The operator of that system doesn't need to stockpile 20 different categories of supplies. Water is the one thing everyone needs, every day, without exception, which means the person with reliable water production has a barter position that doesn't erode over time. It gets stronger as stored supplies elsewhere run out. The asymmetry between water's value and its current cost is extraordinary. A quality gravity filter capable of treating 100,000 gallons costs under $300. At 2 gallons per person per day, that filter can supply safe water for a single person for 137 years, or for a community of 20 people for nearly 7 years. In normal times, that filter sits in a garage unused. In a collapse scenario, it is the most valuable object within a considerable radius. It's worth noting what makes water unique compared to every other item on this list. It has no competitor and no substitute. Antibiotics can sometimes be delayed for marginal conditions. Salt can be partially substituted with other preservation methods. Fuel can be conserved aggressively. Water has no substitute and no meaningful delay. 3 days is the outer limit under mild conditions, and it shortens considerably under physical stress, heat, illness, and the elevated physical demands of a collapse environment. The most thoughtful approach to water as a barter resource involves not just having it, but having a clear community relationship around it. Control over something everyone needs is not just a trading advantage, it's a community management responsibility. In a genuine collapse scenario, the difference between a water resource being a community asset and a point of violent conflict is often determined by how the person controlling it decides to treat the people around them. That's not a preparedness question, it's a character question, and it might be the most important one on this entire list. Taken together, these 11 items aren't a doomsday shopping list so much as a different lens for thinking about value itself. Bitcoin, gold, stock certificates, all of them represent a claim on value that depends on systems functioning normally. The items on this list are the value itself, no system required. That distinction is worth remembering long before any collapse scenario arrives, because it changes how a person evaluates what's actually worth having. If this video gave you a practical framework for thinking about real-world value, hit the like button. It helps this content reach more people who need it. And subscribe to the channel for more straightforward preparedness and economics content that doesn't talk down to you.